Faruqi. Senator Bragg.
Thank you very much, Madam Acting Deputy President. Yeah, good. Thank you very much. Well, this is a good bill, and a bill which means a lot to the people of Sydney, particularly those that live around the magnificent Sydney Harbour. Now, Sydney Harbour would have probably the world's most recognisable shoreline. Certainly in terms of this country, it would be amongst the very best of our natural assets. Now, the Harbour Trust itself was an election commitment from the Howard years, back in the 1998 campaign, where the Howard government committed itself to return the Sydney Harbour, I'm quoting here from the statement in 1998, the Sydney Harbour foreshore defence sites to the people of Australia in order to protect the national heritage values of these sites. The Howard government initially provided a $90 million contribution from the Federation Fund, which established this trust. Now, it was established as a transitional body designed to protect and preserve the former defence lands, which are scattered around Sydney Harbour. We've just been living in the last 18 months through a serious pandemic. And the last serious pandemic we had, which was broadly known as the Spanish flu, about 100 years ago, there was a quarantine station set up at Manly, which is still used today, not in its original purpose, but it is a magnificent, pristine land up at North Head. Now, the sites, as I say, are scattered around Sydney. We protected and preserved them in the initial legislation back in the beginning of the century. And so it's been extended as a transitional body again and again through various acts of this parliament. The Minister, Susan Lee, commissioned a review about 18 months ago to have a look at the appropriateness of the trust, and the review recommended, on the basis of significant community input, that the trust ought to be established as a permanent ongoing entity and arrangement. Now that is a central point here, that we are committed to conserving these sites, not just because they're beautiful, but because they give the public access. They provide public access to sites which are not available anywhere else in the world. North Head, Middle Head, Platypus, so on and so forth. And so that was a central recommendation, or one of the central recommendations of the review. Now, there was a lot of scaremongering at the time from various people, including the member for Warringah, saying that it was going to be the end of the world, that we were doing a review. But we decided that it was the right thing to do, to have a look at the structure that was there. And the review recommended a permanent solution, and that is what the government's policy is. Now, I also put in a submission to that review in consultation with the community, and the community here is really key. There is no question that these lands were preserved because of the actions taken by the executive government of the day, the Howard government, subsequently extended several times and now made permanent by this government. But that is only one side of the story. And yes, there has been, to a large degree, bipartisan support, but the community here is at the heart. And I've had the great pleasure to be able to work with the Headland Preservation Group, with Jill Lestrange and Julie Goodsir and the community there and the committee. And these people have gone above and beyond in terms of representing the interests of their community by engaging deeply on these issues in terms of how these unique sites can be preserved and protected from a military perspective, from an Indigenous perspective, from a community perspective. And we wouldn't be here today without these community groups, without, in particular, the Headland Preservation Group, which continues to do a great body of work, not only on advocacy, but also in terms of providing volunteers to maintain the sites. I mean, there are hundreds of volunteers that work on the trust lands that keep the trust lands beautiful and viable. And so, apart from establishing the trust in perpetuity, this bill also ensures that there is a clearer governance framework. It sets out that the trust lands will be maintained by the Commonwealth. They must be held in public hands. But we're also striving to improve the board and the governance and the functions. There has been a lot of discussion about leasing, and I hear the comments around the chamber that a long-term lease could be a de facto way of privatising public lands. And that is a concern that has been shared by the Morrison government. And what we have tried to do with this bill is draw a line in the sand about long-term leases. So the Trust can conduct leases up to 25 years under this legislation, which has bipartisan support. And if there is a desire to have a longer-term lease out to 35 years, then that can be done. But it can only be done under a legal instrument which is disallowable after there's been extensive community consultation. And again, that is at the heart of this. We wouldn't be here without the community advocacy, and so we must always ensure that if there are to be leases longer than 25 years that are desired by the Trust and the community groups, that there is an extensive process that also results in those legal arrangements being subject to disallowance. And the bill does also state very clearly that you cannot have a lease longer than 35 years. So, I mean, the case in which you might find a lease that is longer than 25 years may well be that there is a need to get more private capital to rehabilitate a site on the Trust lands. Now, we are also putting our hands in our pocket, as we have in the last budget, to help remediate some of these former defence lands. In the last budget, we've committed $40 million to help remediate, but there is more work that needs to be done on all these sites, and so there is money in the budget to keep on looking at the plans that are required to be delivered with community consent. So, in summary, this is a very important piece of law, or will be, I hope, a very important piece of law for the people of Sydney and the people of New South Wales and the people of Australia. When people think about Australia, they think about these sites. And we are ensuring that these sites will be in public hands forever and ever. And that is a great win for the community. And I want to thank again all the community advocates that have spent an enormous amount of time on not only public advocacy, but in preservation and grassroots conservation.
Thank you, Senator Bragg.